On a rain-slicked night in Los Angeles, billionaire tech titan Adrian Vale lost the use of his legs, and with it, the loyalty of everyone he trusted. His wife and uncle moved swiftly to steal his empire, mistaking paralysis for weakness and silence for surrender. But in the shadows of his own mansion, a defiant maid refused to see him as broken, and gave him something far more powerful than revenge. Hello family, welcome to Tales by King. Kindly subscribe to my YouTube channel for more beautiful stories. Thank you as you do so. Sit back, relax as we dive into the story. Los Angeles worshipped success the way other cities worshipped saints. From the top floor of Vale Tower in downtown LA, the city looked obedient, glass buildings bowing beneath the California sun, traffic flowing like disciplined arteries, helicopters slicing through hazy air. It was a city that devoured the weak and crowned the relentless. Peter Vale had built his throne there. At 38, he was already a legend in tech and defense circles. Vale Dynamics had started as a predictive AI startup in a rented Pasadena garage and evolved into a multi-billion-dollar defense analytics empire with contracts tied to the Pentagon and private security giants. He wasn't just wealthy, he was necessary. Investors called him visionary. Competitors called him dangerous. His wife, Vanessa Vale, called him unstoppable. That night, the rain had come without warning. Mulholland Drive twisted through the hills like a serpent, slick and treacherous under the storm. Peter preferred driving himself. Control mattered to him. The Aston Martin's engine purred beneath his touch as he left a private dinner with potential European investors. He remembered checking the rearview mirror, remembered the sudden flicker of headlights behind him, remembered pressing the brakes. They didn't respond. A fraction of a second, long enough for realization. The pedals sank too easily. His jaw tightened. He downshifted instinctively, tried to steer into the curve, but the car hydroplaned. Tires lost grip. The world tilted violently. Metal screamed. Glass shattered inward like frozen rain. The vehicle flipped once, twice, before slamming into the hillside barrier. The impact snapped something inside him that he would later learn was his spine. When everything stopped, there was only the smell of gasoline and rain leaking through shattered glass. He couldn't feel his legs. He tried to move. Nothing happened. He tried again, panic rising, breath turning ragged. His fingers twitched faintly. His arms trembled. But below his chest, nothing. Sirens pierced the night. Red lights blurred in the rain. Voices shouted commands. "Sir, can you hear me? Don't move him. Spinal injury suspected. We're losing pressure." He wanted to curse at them, to tell them to be careful, to order them, as he did everyone else. But darkness swallowed him whole. When he woke, the ceiling was sterile white. A ventilator hissed rhythmically beside him. His throat burned from intubation. His body felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. He attempted to lift his hand. It moved slightly. Relief flared for half a second. Then he tried to move his legs. Nothing. A neurologist with careful diction delivered the diagnosis with rehearsed sympathy. C6 spinal cord injury. Severe trauma. You have partial upper limb function, but paralysis from the chest down. With aggressive therapy, you may regain some additional mobility in your arms. And my legs, Peter rasped. The pause said everything. Walking again is statistically unlikely. The words echoed longer than the beeping machines. Vanessa arrived 12 hours later. She looked immaculate, silk blouse, tailored trousers, diamond studs. The only sign of distress was the slight tightness around her mouth. Cameras had already gathered outside Cedars-Sinai. The media loved a fallen titan. She leaned down and kissed his cheek gently, avoiding the wires. "I was terrified," she whispered. He studied her eyes. They were glossy but dry. "I'll fix this," he said automatically, even as the words sounded absurd. She didn't answer. Instead, she reached for her phone when she thought he wasn't looking. Within days, hospital visits became boardroom briefings. Victor Vale arrived in tailored suits and quiet authority. Older by 15 years, silver-haired, composed. His uncle had helped him raise early capital when no one else believed in him. Victor stood at the foot of the hospital bed like a statesman. "The board is nervous," he said smoothly. "Defense contracts require confidence. We can't appear unstable." "I'm not unstable," Peter snapped, voice strained. Of course not, Victor replied calmly. But markets are emotional. He presented documents, temporary transfer of executive authority, emergency voting privileges, contingency structures for optics. Vanessa stood beside him. It's temporary, she said softly. Just until you recover. Peter hesitated. His hands trembled when they placed the pen between his fingers. His grip wasn't steady. Morphine dulled the sharpness of his instincts. He signed. Victor's eyes flickered briefly, not with sympathy but satisfaction. The move back to the Bel Air mansion was staged like a quiet funeral. The estate overlooked Los Angeles, all white stone and floor-to-ceiling glass. Before the accident, it had felt expansive. Now it felt cavernous. A hospital-grade bed replaced the custom Italian frame in the master suite. Ramps appeared discreetly. Railings were installed. Staff moved differently around him, careful, distant. Vanessa gradually stopped sleeping in the same room. I don't want to disturb you, she said. He noticed she no longer updated him on social events. Charity galas. Industry dinners. Photos surfaced online of her attending alone. Always poised, always radiant. Meanwhile, Vale dynamics began changing in ways he couldn't control. Emails stopped including him in key decisions. Board meetings happened without his presence, citing medical strain. Victor assumed more authority temporarily. 3 months later, financial news outlets announced. Victor Vale appointed acting CEO of Vale Dynamics. Peter learned about it from television. He threw the remote across the room, rage surging through a body that could not stand to express it. The final fracture came on a quiet Thursday evening. Peter had wheeled himself into the hallway outside the study. The doors were slightly ajar. Light spilled onto the marble floor. Vanessa's voice drifted out first. He's deteriorating emotionally. It won't take much to prove incapacity. Victor replied calmly. The merger must finalize before divorce proceedings. Once consolidated, control remains with us. And Peter, she asked. A pause. He'll receive a comfortable settlement. We'll ensure he's provided for. Provided for. Like an old liability. Peter sat frozen in his wheelchair, pulse hammering in his ears. Every word was deliberate. Planned. The brakes. The timing of Victor's pressure on the board. Vanessa's sudden emotional distance. The pieces began aligning with terrifying clarity. He wasn't unlucky. He was inconvenient. The rain outside mirrored the night of the crash, tapping steadily against the glass. For the first time since the accident, anger overpowered despair. They believed paralysis meant surrender. They believed he was broken. They had mistaken silence for weakness. In the reflection of the hallway mirror, Peter studied himself, pale, thinner, seated instead of standing. But his eyes were the same. Sharp, calculating, alive. The king had fallen. But he was not finished. The agency sent her without ceremony. No dramatic entrance. No orchestra of fate. Just a quiet knock on the side entrance of the Bel Air mansion. Peter had already dismissed 3 caregivers in 2 months. One treated him like porcelain. One like a paycheck. The third avoided eye contact entirely, speaking to him in a tone better suited for a child. He was in the sunroom when she walked in. Loose gray scrubs. White sneakers. Dark hair tied into a low bun. No makeup beyond practicality. She carried a canvas bag slung over one shoulder and a tablet tucked under her arm. She paused just long enough to assess him. Not the wheelchair, not the expensive throw blanket across his legs, but him. Mr. Vale, she asked. Her voice was steady. Neutral. Not soft with pity. Yes. I'm Stella Reyes. The agency briefed me on your condition. She set her bag down. I don't do miracles. I do work. If you're willing to do the same, we'll get somewhere. He stared at her. You're very direct, he said coolly. I find it saves time. The corner of his mouth twitched faintly. It was the first hint of amusement he'd felt in weeks. Stella came from East Los Angeles. Nursing certification earned through night classes. She'd cared for veterans, stroke victims, and a retired judge who screamed at nurses until she calmly threatened to quit. She wasn't intimidated by wealth or status. She'd grown up navigating louder things than luxury. The mansion didn't impress her, but the loneliness inside it did. Vanessa rarely visited Peter's wing now. When she did, it was brief and performative, asking about medication in a voice meant to be overheard. Staff rotated shifts quietly, careful not to linger. Stella noticed the silence most. On her second day, she rolled his wheelchair toward the terrace for morning light therapy. "I'm fine inside," Peter said flatly. "You're not," she replied without hesitation. "Your vitamin D levels say otherwise." "You read my labs?" "Yes." He studied her profile as she adjusted the chair position to face the sun. "You don't seem particularly deferential," he observed. "I respect effort, not titles." That answer lingered longer than it should have. Rehabilitation began with small humiliations. Grip exercises, resistance bands, slow attempts at lifting his own forearm without tremor. The first time he failed to lift a 2-pound weight, he flung it across the room. Stella didn't flinch. "Throwing things burns calories," she said calmly, "but it won't rebuild neural pathways. You don't understand what this is like." "No," she agreed, "but I understand what giving up looks like." He glared at her. She met it evenly. That was the moment something shifted, not affection, not yet, but respect. Nights were the worst. Pain crawled along his nerves in phantom flashes. His body felt both numb and electrified. Sleep came fractured. Stella began staying later than scheduled. Sometimes she would sit across from him in the study while he stared at the city lights beyond the glass. "Tell me about Vale dynamics," she said one evening. "It's not your concern. I'm trying to understand what you lost." His jaw tightened. "I didn't lose it." "Then why does everyone act like you did?" He turned toward her sharply. "What do you mean?" She hesitated only slightly. "Staff talk. They think your uncle's restructuring permanently." That word again. Permanently. He gestured toward his desk. "Bring me the tablet." She handed it to him without question. "Unlock the finance portal." She did. Numbers flooded the screen. Transaction histories. Acquisition documents. Asset reallocations. At first glance, everything looked standard. But Peter's mind had built this empire from nothing. He knew its rhythms like a composer knew music. "These transfers," he muttered. "What about them?" "They're layered, hidden in subsidiaries." Stella leaned closer, her shoulder brushing his slightly. "You think he's siphoning funds?" "I know he is." The air thickened. "Then why hasn't anyone stopped him?" "Because I signed authority over while medicated." His voice darkened. "And because the board believes I'm compromised." Stella studied him in silence. "You don't seem compromised," she said finally. He let out a dry laugh. "I can't feel half my body." "That's physical," she replied. "I meant your mind." Weeks turned into a fragile rhythm. Morning therapy. Afternoon document reviews. Evening strategy discussions disguised as cognitive exercises. Stella began bringing him printed reports under the guise of mental engagement therapy. She learned quickly: corporate structures, voting rights, leverage points. "You're teaching me corporate warfare," she observed one afternoon. "You're observant," he replied. "And you're planning something." He didn't deny it. Instead, he asked, "Why are you helping me beyond your job description?" She didn't answer immediately. Because she saw the man beneath the arrogance. Because she recognized betrayal when she saw it. Because she'd grown up watching powerful men crush her father's small contracting business through legal manipulation. But what she said was simpler. Because you're not finished. Vanessa's distance became blatant. She stopped entering his room entirely. One night, laughter echoed faintly from the opposite wing, male laughter. Not Victor's. Peter's hands tightened on the armrest. Stella noticed. "Do you want me to close the doors?" she asked quietly. He stared straight ahead. "No. Let it play." The humiliation was deliberate. Vanessa was already rewriting her future publicly, charity appearances without him, interviews hinting at private struggles. They were erasing him while he was still alive. That night, after transferring him from chair to bed, Stella lingered. "You don't deserve this," she said softly. "Deserve has nothing to do with it." She hesitated before adding, "You're still dangerous." They shouldn't forget that. He looked up at her. Dangerous. No one had described him that way since the accident. Her hand brushed his as she adjusted the blanket. Neither pulled away immediately. Physical progress came slowly but measurably. His grip strengthened. He could propel the wheelchair short distances independently. He could lift light weights without tremor. Every improvement felt like reclaiming territory. One afternoon, while reviewing mechanical reports from his crashed Aston Martin, quietly obtained through an old contact, he found it. Brake line tampering. Not manufacturer defect. Intentional interference. He handed the tablet to Stella. She read it twice. "That's not an accident," she said quietly. "No." Her eyes darkened, not with fear, but anger. "They tried to kill you." He watched her reaction carefully. Most people would retreat at that realization. She didn't. Instead, she asked, "What's your next move?" Something settled inside him then, solid, certain. For months he had felt like a discarded relic. But Stella looked at him not as broken, but as restrained power. And power, when restrained long enough, does not disappear. It sharpens. Outside, Los Angeles glittered like nothing had changed. Inside the Bel Air mansion, the first real alliance Peter had left was forming, not out of obligation, not out of strategy alone, but out of something that was slowly becoming far more dangerous than pity. Belief. By the time autumn settled over Los Angeles, the mansion no longer felt like a mausoleum. It felt like a war room. Peter's days were no longer consumed by silent resentment. They had structure now. Rehabilitation at dawn, strategy by noon, encrypted calls by evening. Stella had reorganized more than his medication schedule. She had reorganized his will. He could now maneuver his wheelchair without assistance across the entire West Wing. His grip had strengthened enough to hold a pen firmly, to sign documents without tremor. Small victories. But each one carved away the narrative of helplessness Victor had carefully spread. Vanessa had officially filed for divorce. Irreconcilable emotional divergence following traumatic injury, the filing read. The wording was elegant, detached, strategic. She requested control of shared assets pending mental health evaluation. Cited erratic emotional behavior. Attached statements from 2 board members loyal to Victor. Peter read the filing in silence. Stella stood across from him in the study. "She's building a case to declare you unfit," she said quietly. "She won't succeed," he replied. But for the first time, his voice wasn't fueled by pride. It was fueled by calculation. The nights grew longer. Not because of pain, but because of proximity. It had started subtly. A hand lingering too long during therapy stretches. Conversations that drifted from corporate maneuvering into personal confessions. One evening, as the city pulsed below the terrace, Stella sat beside him rather than across from him. "You never talk about before," she said. "Before what?" "Before the Empire. Before Vanessa." He watched a helicopter blink red across the skyline. "I was poor," he said simply. "Scholarships. Grants. Slept in the office during the first year of development. Vanessa came later, after the first acquisition. She liked the ascent. And now, she likes the exit." Stella absorbed that. "You still love her?" she asked. The question hung in the cool night air. "No," he answered finally. "I loved who I thought she was." Silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, but charged. When he shifted slightly, unsteady, her hand instinctively steadied his shoulder. He looked at it, then at her. There was no pity in her eyes. No calculation. Just heat. Months of shared battles, shared secrets, shared fury had forged something intimate. Not fragile. Not impulsive. Inevitable. He reached for her. His fingers closed around her wrist, not commanding, but asking. She didn't pull away. When she leaned down to kiss him, it wasn't gentle or hesitant. It was deliberate. A crossing of lines neither of them pretended not to see. He had been touched by doctors, by nurses, by obligation. But this was choice. Their relationship unfolded in quiet defiance. Vanessa had stopped entering his wing entirely. The household staff knew better than to question Stella's extended hours. Rumors flickered through the servants' quarters, but loyalty in a mansion like this was transactional, and Peter still paid well. Stella moved from the guest suite to his wing without announcement. Not as a maid. As something else. She pushed him harder in therapy now, but the edge of command had softened into partnership. "You hate needing help," she teased one morning as she adjusted his resistance bands. "I hate inefficiency," he corrected. "Same thing. but he no longer bristled at her assistance. He accepted it, trusted it, and trust, for Peter Vale, was rarer than capital. The confirmation came on a Tuesday morning. Stella had been unusually quiet at breakfast. She moved slower, distracted. He noticed immediately. "You're off rhythm," he observed. She hesitated, then walked away without answering. An hour later, she returned holding something small and white in her hand. She didn't speak. She simply placed it on the glass desk in front of him. 2 pink lines. Peter stared at it. The world narrowed to that fragile piece of plastic. "You're certain?" he asked, voice lower than usual. "Yes." The air between them shifted again, this time heavier, larger than either of them. Vanessa had always postponed children. "Not yet," she would say. "It complicates travel. It affects my body. It distracts from growth." Peter had agreed, telling himself there would be time. Now time had chosen differently. He wheeled closer to Stella. "Do you want this?" he asked carefully. She met his eyes without hesitation. "I do." That answer mattered more than anything else. He exhaled slowly, tension unwinding into something unfamiliar. "Hope. This child," he said, "will not grow up in shadows." News of the pregnancy was kept tightly guarded. Only Marcus Chin was informed. Marcus had once been Vale Dynamics COO, brilliant, cautious, and one of the few men Peter trusted. Victor had forced him out 6 months after the accident under the pretense of strategic restructuring. Now Marcus communicated through encrypted channels. When Peter told him about the child, there was a long pause on the secure call. "That changes everything," Marcus said. "Yes. You're thinking legacy. I'm thinking inevitability. Because an heir altered power dynamics. Investors respected continuity. Bloodline. Stability. Victor and Vanessa had positioned Peter as a dying relic, an isolated, paralyzed man without succession. Now there would be one. But with the pregnancy came danger. Victor's financial maneuvers had accelerated. A merger with a private defense contractor was being finalized, a move that would permanently dilute Peter's voting power under the emergency authority clause he had signed in the hospital. Stella reviewed documents late into the night with him. "You were drugged when you signed this," she said, scanning the clause. "Yes. Then we prove coercion. It won't be that simple. Nothing worth taking back ever is." He studied her. "You're not afraid?" he asked. "Of what?" "Of being attached to this war." She stepped closer. "I grew up watching powerful men destroy everything my family built because we didn't have leverage. I'm not afraid of war." Her hand rested lightly over her abdomen. "I'm afraid of losing." As weeks passed, the pregnancy became visible. Not dramatically, but enough that Stella's movements grew more careful. Peter noticed everything. He insisted on hiring a private obstetrician under a confidentiality contract. Installed additional security cameras throughout the property. Quietly replaced 2 staff members he suspected of reporting to Victor. One evening, as rain traced slow lines down the windows again, echoing the night of the crash, Stella stood by the glass, one hand resting over her stomach. "He'll try something," she said. "Victor?" Peter asked. "Yes. He already did." She turned to him. He wheeled closer, stopping just in front of her. "They thought paralysis meant the end of my bloodline, the end of my control." His voice was calm, almost cold. "They miscalculated." She searched his expression. "You're changing," she observed. "No," he replied softly. "I'm remembering who I was." He placed his hand over hers, over the faint curve that held their future. For the first time since the accident, he did not feel diminished. He felt multiplied. Because empires are not sustained by buildings or stock valuations. They are sustained by continuation. And now, inside the woman who had refused to look at him with pity, Peter Vale's continuation was growing. The board still saw a crippled man. Victor saw a temporary obstacle. Vanessa saw an inconvenience to be dissolved in court. None of them yet understood what the existence of that child meant. A king without an heir is vulnerable. A king with one becomes patient. And Peter Vale had learned patience the hard way, sitting still while the world underestimated him. He would not waste it. Not now. Not when his bloodline had just rewritten the game. Winter in Los Angeles was subtle. Cooler nights, sharper air, skies so clear they felt almost artificial. The city glittered with its usual indifference, unaware that inside Vale Tower, war was about to surface in daylight. Victor believed the timing was perfect. The merger with Halcyon Defense Systems was hours away from final board approval. Once executed, voting shares would realign permanently. Peter's temporary transfer of executive authority, signed in a hospital bed under morphine and shock, would become structurally irreversible. Victor stood in the executive conference room on the 52nd floor, hands clasped behind his back, surveying the skyline like a conqueror reviewing territory. Vanessa sat to his right, composed in ivory silk, divorce filings progressing smoothly through private arbitration. Her legal team had already requested a psychiatric evaluation for Peter, citing erratic emotional fixation on internal sabotage narratives. They had built the story carefully. Paralyzed, isolated, delusional, unfit. The board members trickled in, some loyal, some opportunistic, some merely afraid of instability. Screens lit up with financial projections. Analysts waited on standby. Victor adjusted his cufflinks. Once this vote concludes, he began smoothly, Vale Dynamics enters a new era of strategic resilience. The doors opened. Every head turned. Peter Vale rolled in alone. No assistant. No nurse. No hesitation. He wore a charcoal suit tailored to precision. His posture was upright, shoulders squared, movements controlled and deliberate. Months of therapy had strengthened his upper body. He maneuvered the chair with quiet authority, stopping at the head of the table, the seat that had once been unquestionably his. A murmur rippled across the room. Victor's expression didn't falter, but his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Peter," he said, tone measured, "this meeting concerns sensitive negotiations. You should be resting." Peter's gaze moved calmly around the table. "I own 38% of this company personally," he replied. "I don't require rest. I require transparency." Vanessa's fingers curled slightly over her tablet. "This isn't the place for emotional outbursts," she said coolly. He looked at her, not with longing, not with anger, with detachment. "You mistake me," he said evenly. "I'm not emotional." He pressed a button on a small remote resting on his lap. The wall screens shifted. Financial spreadsheets dissolved into forensic accounting trails. Layered shell corporations. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Internal asset transfers rerouted through Halcyon subsidiaries months before merger discussions were publicly disclosed. A low murmur intensified. Victor's smile thinned. "These are speculative interpretations," he said calmly. "They're transaction confirmations," Peter replied. The next slide appeared. A mechanical inspection report. Brake line failure, non-accidental severance. The room went silent. Vanessa's composure cracked first, a flicker in her eyes, quickly masked. Peter continued, voice controlled. "The contractor responsible for servicing my vehicle is owned by a holding company tied to Vale Strategic Ventures." Victor didn't blink. "And Vale Strategic Ventures," Peter finished, "is majority owned by you." Several board members shifted visibly. Marcus Chin entered then, flanked by 2 legal representatives. His return had not been announced. "I represent 12% of external investor shares," Marcus said firmly. "And I've submitted formal requests for a federal investigation into financial misconduct and attempted corporate sabotage." Victor's calm finally fractured. "This is absurd," he snapped. "You're accusing family of—" "Yes," Peter interrupted quietly. "I am." The simplicity of it carried more weight than shouting would have. Vanessa stood abruptly. "You're spiraling," she said sharply. "This paranoia is exactly why." "Be careful," Peter said, eyes locking onto hers. "The emails between you and Victor regarding post-accident asset positioning are archived." Her face drained of color. "You accessed my private. You accessed my life." The room shifted decisively then. Power in Los Angeles was never moral. It was reactive. Investors didn't care about betrayal. They cared about liability. And Victor had just become one. A senior board member cleared his throat. "In light of these revelations, I motion to suspend acting CEO Victor Vale pending independent investigation." Another voice followed. "Seconded." Victor looked around the table, calculating. He had built his strategy on Peter's silence. He had not accounted for preparation. The vote passed. Security was called, not dramatically, but decisively. Victor left the room without resistance, though his eyes burned with restrained fury as they locked onto Peter. "This isn't over," he said quietly. Peter's expression remained unchanged. "It is for you." Vanessa did not look at Peter as she gathered her things. Her poise had evaporated, replaced by something sharper, resentment mixed with fear. "You've destroyed everything," she said under her breath. "No," he replied calmly. "I reclaimed it." By sunset, news alerts erupted across financial networks. Vale Dynamics board suspends acting CEO amid fraud investigation. Attempted corporate sabotage alleged in high-profile tech scandal. Federal agents arrived at Victor's downtown office before midnight. By morning, Vanessa's divorce strategy had collapsed. Her legal team shifted immediately from offense to damage control. Peter returned to the mansion late that evening. Stella was waiting in the foyer. She had watched the press conference from the living room, one hand resting protectively over her growing stomach. When he rolled inside, there was no dramatic embrace. Just stillness. "Well," she asked softly. "It's done," he replied. She exhaled, a breath she'd been holding for months. He studied her face. "You were right," he said. "About what?" "They underestimated me." A faint smile curved her lips. "They underestimated us." He moved closer, resting his hand gently against her abdomen. The war was not entirely over. Legal battles would stretch for months. Criminal investigations would unravel slowly. Vanessa would fight for whatever dignity she could salvage. But the empire was no longer slipping away. It was his again, not because he stood, not because he regained what his body had lost, but because he adapted faster than those who thought him broken. Outside, Los Angeles continued glittering, unmoved, merciless, opportunistic. Inside the mansion, a different future solidified. Victor had believed blood gave him leverage. Vanessa had believed beauty and timing would secure her escape. They had both miscalculated one fundamental truth. Peter Vale had built his empire from nothing once before. And this time, he had something stronger than ambition driving him. He had legacy. And legacy does not surrender. Spring arrived softly in Los Angeles. Jacaranda trees bloomed in violent purple along the streets of Bel Air, their petals scattering across pavement like quiet celebration. The scandal that had once dominated headlines was already being replaced by newer disasters, fresher gossip. The city moved on the way it always did, quickly, opportunistically. But inside the Vale estate, everything had changed. Stella went into labor just before dawn. Peter woke to the sharp intake of her breath beside him. Even in sleep, he had grown attuned to the smallest shifts in her movement. "Stella." His voice was alert instantly. She was gripping the edge of the mattress, jaw tight. "It's time." There was no panic in her tone, only certainty. Within minutes, the house was awake. The private obstetrician Peter had contracted months earlier arrived through the secured gate. The medical suite prepared discreetly in the East Wing was activated. Peter insisted on being present. The staff hesitated, space limitations, equipment, but one look at his expression ended the discussion. He positioned himself near the head of the bed, his wheelchair locked in place. His hands, steady now, strong from relentless therapy, wrapped around Stella's. Hours stretched. Labor was not graceful. It was raw, demanding, powerful. Stella did not scream theatrically. She endured with clenched determination, eyes occasionally locking with Peter's. "Stay with me," she whispered once. "I'm not going anywhere," he replied. "Not now. Not ever again." When the cry finally split the air, sharp, indignant, alive, the room shifted. A boy. Healthy. Strong lungs. Fierce presence. The doctor placed the child carefully into Peter's arms first, adjusting his grip to compensate for limited lower body stability. For a moment, Peter simply stared. Gabriel Vale. Small. Warm. Unaware of legacy or betrayal or corporate warfare. Just breath and heartbeat. Peter's thumb brushed lightly over the baby's cheek. His hands, once trembling with loss months ago, were unshaking now. "You came at the right time," he murmured quietly. Stella watched him from the bed, exhaustion and triumph blending in her expression. "You needed him," she said softly. Peter glanced up at her. "No," he replied after a moment. We needed each other. Victor's trial began 3 weeks later. Federal prosecutors built their case meticulously: fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy tied to attempted vehicular sabotage. The evidence Peter had unveiled became the backbone of the investigation. Victor maintained his composure publicly, but his empire of influence crumbled quickly once loyalty turned to self-preservation. Vanessa settled quietly. Her divorce agreement stripped her of major voting rights in Vale dynamics. She received financial compensation, substantial but nowhere near what she had once anticipated. The social circles that had embraced her began distancing themselves with polite efficiency. Los Angeles admired power, and Peter had reclaimed his. He did not publicly smear her. He did not rage in interviews. He simply moved forward. Cold. Controlled. Final. Vale Dynamics underwent swift restructuring. Peter reinstated Marcus Chun as COO and introduced strict transparency protocols across all subsidiaries. Board members who had voted too eagerly for his removal found their contracts quietly terminated or diluted. He operated differently now. Less trusting. More deliberate. But not hollow. He often brought Gabriel to the top floor of Vale Tower after hours. The city lights fascinated the child even in infancy, wide eyes reflecting skyscraper glow. Employees who saw Peter in the hallways no longer saw fragility. They saw a man who had survived annihilation and returned sharper. He never walked again. Specialists across the country offered experimental procedures, overseas trials, advanced implants. Peter considered them carefully and declined most. He no longer measured strength by whether he could stand. Strength had revealed itself differently. One evening, months after Gabriel's birth, Peter and Stella sat on the terrace overlooking the city. Gabriel slept against Peter's chest in a secure carrier adapted for his chair. The baby's small hand clutched the fabric of his father's jacket. You ever think about how close it came to ending differently? Stella asked quietly. Yes. And he looked out over Los Angeles, the city that had witnessed his rise, his fall, and his return. They thought paralysis was the end of my story, he said calmly. It was the edit. Stella studied him, the man who had once ruled through ambition alone. Now he ruled through something steadier. Gabriel stirred softly. Peter adjusted him instinctively, protective without appearing so. An empire isn't towers or contracts, Stella said after a moment. No, Peter agreed. It's continuity. Below them, traffic moved in endless streams. Deals were being made. Alliances formed and broken. The city remained merciless. But in the quiet above it, a different kind of power had settled. Victor had sought control through blood ties twisted into betrayal. Vanessa had sought security through proximity to dominance. Neither understood what Peter had learned the hard way. Power taken by force can be reclaimed. Trust once broken can be replaced. But legacy, true legacy, must be built intentionally. Gabriel shifted again, settling. Peter's gaze softened slightly, just slightly, as he looked down at his son. They tried to bury me, he said, voice low and even. Stella's fingers intertwined with his. And a faint, controlled smile touched his lips. They forgot I built my empire from the ground up. The city shimmered beneath them. And this time, no one mistook stillness for weakness. That brings us to the end of this video. I hope you find this story worth watching. If you do, kindly subscribe to my YouTube channel for more beautiful stories, like, comment, and share this video to your friends and loved ones. Your support and engagement encourage me to post more videos. Thanks for watching.